Now we move to the plot tab, and this is what I like to do last once I have all these other things filled out, and some of them are already pre-filled out, like we have the scene name that's already generated by the AI. So story arc, this pertains to what we saw on that page where it visualized the whole story's arc for us. And this is basically asking, is this one of those pivotal story arc scenes, one of those 5 scenes? So the 5 scenes are inciting incident, plot point 1, middle, plot point 2, climax, or resolution. And if it is not, then we leave this as no, and it isn't, because the inciting incident comes later when she discovers the AI. So that's not this one yet. So when we click yes, then this drop down will show you all those story arc scenes. So which one would it be? And if we click no, then this drop down changes to non-story arc scenes. So in this case, since it's the prologue, this introduces the character. So I would say character introduction. Opening type is looking at whether this scene opens with dialogue, thought, description, or action. In this case, it's action, because Aubrey is staring at her textbook. So that's action. So closing type, so we look at the very last sentence. It's a text. So it would be, I would put that under dialogue, because she's essentially saying this through text to her friend. Anchored, this means, is the scene anchored in POV, scene time, and scene setting? So do we know pretty much right away when you start reading, within the first few paragraphs, whose point of view is this from? Yes, we know right away. It says right here, so it's anchored. Do we know when this takes place? Yep. 11:42, nighttime, April. Yep. Scene setting, dorm room, university. So this prologue is well anchored. Other scenes may not be, but this one is. So now these were all filled out by the AI as well. Entry hook, as I showed under notes, that's what I might have to revise this scene to account for. If I move this to the beginning, then it might make my scene stronger. So I want to look at that. This is already pretty good. The exit hook is, what do these letters mean? So the reader by the end of this scene asks this question and they want to know, what does this mean? I want to know more. I want to keep reading, so that they move to the next scene. And as we already looked at the tension conflict before, revelation is similar to, in the character here, the POV knowledge gained, but what revelation does the character have? And you can put something else here, like for example, or whatever it is that you want to keep track of down the line. Backstory. Backstory is just something in the past, before the story starts, that the reader learns from this scene. And flashback, sometimes there's going to be flashback, sometimes not, but I don't think in this case there are any, and that's okay. Not every scene needs to have everything. So flashback would be when the character actually experiences that moment as if it was the present. So if a character just mentions something happened in the past, that's not a flashback. It has to be something that's brought to the present as if it's happening now. So scene, middle, and climax we already looked at. Action sequel refers to whether the scene is an action scene, like it's taking the story forward in some active way, or if it's a sequel, which means, is it a response scene? Is it a response to a previous scene? I want to make sure all the story arc scenes, these ones, are action scenes because they drive the story forward. But the other scenes can be sequel scenes because they're a reaction. So this one is very much an action scene because we see something that really drives the story forward, which is that she gets that phone call, she has to act, and the next scene I would say is more of a sequel scene. This one's action. So reader knowledge gained, this one is, again, somewhat similar to backstory, except it doesn't necessarily need to happen in the past. It's just what knowledge does the reader gain from this scene? It's another thing that you can use to keep track of in the story. So for example, or whatever it is you want to keep track of. So that's how you fill all these out. And once you've done that for the scene, then there's multiple ways you can visualize these scenes. And you can do that by going to the visualize page where we first saw this, and then you can go down here to visualize the story in different ways. Here in the story outline section, you can also see a similar map of your story arc, but just in a different format. So you can see here that I have a total of 38 scenes and 38 chapters. As I said before in the previous video, how I have one scene per chapter, so that's why I have the same amount of both. And you can see here, these are the scene names. This is how close together the story arc plot points are. So here we have the inciting incident, plot point 1, then the middle, plot point 2, climax, and resolution. So this is just a different way to view the story arc. And you can view your word count per scene. I touched on this previously. Scenes per chapter, I also touched on this previously. Story map is where we went to evaluate the tension and conflict. And that's what you can do. You have some pre-selected, pre-filled out things over here, so you can click on each of these to view those. So timelines and settings, you can view, or you can view tension and conflict, which I showed before. And there's just different story goal and pacing, which is looking at how that plays out, so on and so forth. Here, your progress, you can see how much you filled out on all your scenes on the evaluate page, the character, plot, and setting elements. Another very useful tool that I like to use is when I go into evaluate and I want to see the tracking for the story goal. I can click on this, and right now it's like just at 0 because I've only marked it for the first scene in the prologue. But once you filled out all your scenes, this should look something like a graph that goes up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down, and you want to make sure that it never goes like this, like it never flatlines, because then your story flatlines, basically. Like I said before, you always want your protagonist to either be impacted negatively by a scene or impacted positively. Or in other words, you want each scene to either have a positive impact on the story goal or a negative impact on the story goal. You never want it to have no or a neutral impact, because that's boring. No one wants to read a story that flatlines. So another way to access all this is when you go to visualize. I went through all the manuscript insights. Then you can go to the character insights, and you can see how many characters there are per scene. So this is another useful metric you can look at. Here there's 2 characters, here there's 8, and here there's 10. So you might want to look at why there's 10 characters here and then just 2 over here. That's another thing to keep in mind. That up here you can see, so there's always at least 2 characters in any of your scenes. So the smallest amount of characters in a scene is always 2, and the maximum is 10. You can look at scenes per character. So Aubrey Quinn in this case has the most scenes, which makes complete sense because she is the protagonist and she is the single POV character. So she's going to have most of the scenes. In fact, she's going to be in all the scenes. If you have a multi-POV story, then you're going to see some of the characters have many scenes as well. You're going to see other characters be in many of the scenes as well. But you always want to make sure your protagonist or your protagonists, if you have multiple protagonists, you always want to make sure that they have the most scenes, or that they have at least more scenes than those who are not protagonists or those who are not POV characters. Again, this is not completely accurate because I need to go into the cast of characters and remove this character, Quinn, because Quinn is either Aubrey Quinn or her father, Torrance Quinn. So actually, let me just do that right now and show you how that changes if I do that. So, let's see where this is not a character. This is why you need to do this before going through. Hacker Aubrey. That's a new one. Mickey Mouse. Alright, that's good enough. So now if I go back to character insights, see it's already changed. This is why it's important to do that first, because now I can see there's actually the lowest number of characters per scene is actually 1 and the highest is 8. So there's a demonstration of why it's important to get your cast of characters down first. And then here you can see there's no Quinn, because that's not a character. There's Aubrey Quinn, Torrance Quinn, and that looks about right. There's still a few here that are not characters, but next we have, going back to the POV, I already went through that one, and then the goal tracking. Now we can look at plot insights. So purpose of scenes. If you remember when you were on the evaluate page under the plot tab, there was scene purpose, so you can see what's the purpose of each scene and how many are taking the story forward in some way. So maybe if you have a bunch of character introductions, then you'd be like, why are there so many character introductions? These are all the story goal scenes that have been set already. But once you have all your scenes filled out on the evaluate page, this will populate. And same here with scene opening and closing types. So you want to kind of vary them. So if you open with action, you might open with dialogue, you might open with thought or description, and same, you might close with a specific type as well. You'll be able to evaluate here, like maybe you open too many scenes with description and you want to vary it up a bit. Maybe you want to open more scenes with action or thought or dialogue. And it also depends on what genre you're writing. Like maybe if you're writing a thriller, then you want to open with more action scenes than description. Maybe if you're world building, you're writing some kind of high fantasy novel, you might be able to get away with opening or closing with more description. So it also depends on your specific genre as well. And last but not least, we have setting insights, and this just shows for each scene all the, sights, smells, sounds, the five senses. This just helps you make sure that all your scenes have at least some of those five sensory to help ground the reader, to help the reader feel like they're present in the scene. So that's pretty much it for Fictionary. I've pretty much summed up all the main things you can do with it. Hopefully, the goal is that once you have everything filled out and you've edited every scene and rewritten everything, that these all align how they're supposed to, or as close as possible. I'm gonna have to look mostly at this plot point 1 here. The way to look at this is, you could press here and see which scene is it talking about. So you could press on each of these scenes. Of course, it starts with the prologue and the inciting incident. Your inciting incident is usually okay to appear 15% of the way through your novel or earlier. So if it's actually your first scene or your second scene, that's okay too. It can appear earlier, but it's not as great for it to appear later. So I might want to look at that and see why it's appearing later. And then another last thing here that you can do is you go to Journey and Synopsis. So what you can do here, because you've already entered in the story blurb and skeleton blurb, you can create the skeleton synopsis and the story synopsis. So the story synopsis, the difference between a blurb and a synopsis, the blurb is the book blurb or the book description. That's more like the sales copy. So how are you hooking the readers to come to read your book? The synopsis is literally just a step-by-step summary of exactly what happens in your book from start to finish. So the synopsis, you actually reveal what exactly happens, whereas in the story blurb, you're just hinting at what happens. It usually just focuses more on the beginning of the story. The synopsis has spoilers, basically, so you don't want to reveal that to your readers unless they've already read the story. But this is a good way to also look at your story, because the way you build your synopsis is you start with the 5 plot points and then you write them out here. You go to the evaluate page and you go to that plot point. So whatever you have for the inciting incident, you put down what is your character's POV goal, what's the scene middle, what's the scene climax, and what's the impact. And that's your skeleton synopsis. And then once you have that, then you can build your synopsis out of that, because you want them to focus on your main scenes. And these are your main scenes that drive your story forward. And a really cool thing that you can do here is you can also export your story synopsis. Alright, that's it for Fictionary. As I mentioned, I use the StoryCoach, so when I first import a manuscript, it appears under my clients. And because this is technically my book, I can click this and move it into my bookshelf, which is where all my stories are. And this is where I edit. But if I'm editing a client's book, then I work here, and I work in this platform. Alright, that's it for this video. Next video I will go into how I perform line edits, and I use AutoCrit and ProWriting Aid for this. And first I start with AutoCrit, and I'll show you exactly how I do that in the next video. If you're interested in that, then hit the subscribe button down below, hit the bell to be notified when that video comes out, and if you found this video useful, then hit the like button down below, leave a comment or two. If you have any questions about Fictionary or anything at all, then feel free to comment down below and I will get back to you. I read all comments and I respond to all emails. And if you'd like to contact me, then feel free to send me an email or fill out my contact form. I will leave all that down in the description below. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you found this useful, insightful, and educational. And until next time, happy writing, happy editing. See you in the next one. Bye for now.
Hello, I'm Rochelle. Welcome to Quantum Synergies. You're going to love it here. Don't worry, we will do everything we can to find Dr. Quinn. I'm here whenever you need me. Anytime. Really, anytime.